Hey friends, this is Jeff. Hey, we're tackling again Dr. Danielle J. Siegel's Personality and Wholeness in Therapy. This is the most important book written on Enneagram in the last 25 years, in my view. This book is filled with great, discussable, scientifically grounded insights into the Enneagram. It's why we've spent so much time on it. If you have yet to see some of our material, it is at aroundthecircle.org. Sign up for a membership. Go to the reading room. There's about 20 hours discussing this. So if you get into the science behind Enneagram, this is for you. Allow this to be an introduction to the book. Allow this to be something that whets your appetite, and go over to aroundthecircle.org and find all of the material. Again, we have about 20 hours discussing this book, and well worth your time if you get into the scientific side of the Enneagram. And with that, here's our discussion. Hey friends, it's Jeff. This is Around the Circle. I'm with Danielle Fuller, aka Scientific Enneagram. Welcome, Danielle. I'm excited to talk to you today.
Hi, how's it going?
It's going great. There are a few people on the planet who are going to be better equipped to have an in-depth conversation about the book that we're talking about today than you. So I'm excited because I come across as opinionated when I talk about this book, and I bet 9 that you are, you can bring some mediation, some well-needed reason and perspective to my take. But we're talking about Dr. Siegel's Personality and Wholeness in Therapy some more, and yeah, you have gotten through this material and are excited to do some work on it yourself. Yeah.
Yes, I've gotten through chapter 5, which goes through all of the build-up. The rest of the chapters in the book go through, in Enneagram speak, type by type, in PDP speak, pattern by pattern, to break those down individually. And I have not gotten to those. I feel like those are more of a reference, but I'm very excited to talk about the theory as a whole.
Bang. We should both start this just for the new listeners that are tackling this. If you were going to simplify those first 5 chapters, which we're going to discuss today, how would you characterize the material there?
First of all, this is not going to be, not a lot of people are going to enjoy hearing this who are listening to an Enneagram podcast, but I don't think that this book is for Enneagram nerds. It is intentionally written to be used by therapists and practitioners in how they deal with patients. I see it as a way to bridge Enneagram to skeptics, and by reframing the language, rooting it in existing psychological theory and neuroscience theory, but it's not meant to be a Enneagram fangirl book as much as all of us Enneagram fangirls we're excited about it and are excited about it, and we're waiting for something like this. I think it just does a really good job of recreating the Enneagram framework in a more approachable way for clinicians.
I think that's spot on. And a lot of my own frustrations with the book is exactly on these fronts.
Why you're frustrated is why I like
it. Right? I suppose we could talk about like what could have happened or what still can happen. I mean, there's no reason why the folks who wrote the book couldn't do more work for the Enneagram nerds among us. There are millions of us. It's not like this is a small pocket of, the population. But I think this is correct. My shorthand for this is that all of us are born with a nervous system, and that nervous system develops before we're even born. In utero, lots of stuff's taking place, and there's apparently a lot of science on this front, especially with some of the primary tools that we have in our nervous system necessary for survival. Those include having agency over yourself, bonding with other human beings, and foreseeing dangers and being certain of what will and will not happen. These are apparently very, very important to the human nervous system and for survival in those first few years as a child. When we don't get agency, it produces a feeling in us that we don't like, which is anger. When we don't bond with those who are most important to our tribe. We have a feeling, it's that relational disconnection feeling or shame. And when we don't have certainty about the future, we feel fear. These are feelings we don't like for a reason. They have survival value because they feel so potent and immediate and intrusive, but they push us to get our body parts in the right place at the right time. That's why they have evolutionary value. And so much of Enneagram at its core levels focuses on those three emotions and how we solve them. So there is the overlap with what you can do with talking about that in therapy. And there's also, obviously, I mean, Enneagram is a therapeutic tool at some level that's unfortunately could have been brought into the book a little bit more for said reasons, but that would be where I start. This is actually real science by one of the premier figures of early childhood development, nervous system development in the world. And he's really affectionate toward Enneagram theory and pitching those ideas from that vantage point. So do you see anything that could get plus there? Am I catching? Am I missing anything?
Yeah. So really quick, let's clear. We keep saying PDP. So that stands for Patterns of Developmental Pathways. The book is essentially trying to say that our brains are plastic, and by that it doesn't mean like Barbie plastic, but plastic is in it can change and it can morph, and there's a bunch of neurons firing in there, and they will keep, if they keep firing over and over, they find a clear path. It's just like if you're walking out in the woods, there's usually a trail, and you are probably going to follow that trail 99 out of 100 times. Occasionally you're like, I'm going to go off and make my own trail, but usually you're going to go on the trail that already exists because we are creatures of habit. We take the path of least resistance. That's human nature. So the same thing with the neurons in our brain. They're going to take the paths that they're most used to. And that creates a pattern of developmental pathways, and developmental as in they develop over time. There's the nature part, which he refers to as temperament. And then you have your personality, which is what happens after you're born. You're born with the hardware, and then the second that you come out of your mom, you are blinded by light. There's too many sounds. There's a bunch of people you don't know, and you immediately start having to assess, react, judge, and part of those reactions are happening in your brain from the second you're born, of trying to understand the world, creating schemas in your mind of what it is you're seeing, and creating new neural structures and paring away the ones that don't seem important or relevant to you in the process. So that's what PDP is, Patterns of Developmental Pathways. And he aligns his 9 patterns to the 9 Enneagram types, more or less. That's kind of how they're mapped. And as you mentioned, the key that he focuses on is the agency, bonding, and certainty. That those are the 3 primary needs of humans. I think a lot of times he talks about just mammals in general, but those are the things you need. When you come out, you have to have agency. You have to be able to breathe on your own. You have to be able to swallow. You have to be able to suck. You have to be able to do things. You have to be able to act the second that you're out of the womb, or you're going to die. And then bonding, you have to have caregiver bonds. You have to have people take care of you as an infant, or else you die, because you cannot survive on your own as an infant. And then the certainty is I don't necessarily know that it's as much if you don't have it, you die, but it can take away focus from everything else the more uncertain you are, because the more mental processes you're putting forward towards making sure that you're trying to understand everything, because if everything's chaotic, you don't have enough time to focus on the other things that you need to do, like breathing or bonding, if you're overwhelmed by that fear and that uncertainty. So could eventually lead to dying. But those are the 3 things that you need since birth. And
can I build on that real quick?
Yeah, of course.
If one just wants to say, like 9 types in Enneagram sounds kind of, you're pulling this out of thin air. What if there's 10 types? What if there's 11? Does that disprove the system? It kind of would disprove the system. But here's the thing. The 3 basic needs Danielle's pitching, in terms of agency, bonding, and certainty. These are primal. You can't live without them. I think certainty has to do with predictive power. And at some levels, you have to jump into, if I do this, this result will occur. And we think in those terms all the time. The goldfish aren't able to do that, but we are. And that allows us to have profound survival capacities over and above goldfish. I'm sure there's other things that go into that, but our ability to foresee what happens when we do certain acts has survival value.
Yeah.
The 9 types come from the fact that anger, relational disconnective feelings, sadness for him, and fear are emotions that have apparently a direction in your nervous system. The earliest formation of your nervous system, your physiology takes in the world out there and it takes in the world interiorly. That outward and inward focus is really important to your nervous system. What's out there, what's inside. And you and I both know what it's like to do a self-assessment, look within, do a self-inventory. We also know what it feels like to do an exterior inventory. What's out there, what might get us, etc. Agency, bonding, and certainty have an exterior dynamic, and they also have an interior dynamic. What he wants to say on the pathways side, I think you're like a pathway through the forest that gets trodden over and over and over again, is a great way to talk about this. He says there's really 2 things going on in your nervous system. One, you're going to elevate one of those feelings more than the others. It gets trodden just a little bit more, given who we are, and that forms our personality. And the direction also gets trodden a little bit more, either externally, internally, or it does a balancing act, which he calls dyadic. But here's the thing. There's your 9 types. All you need is one emotion that's primary and one direction that's primary. And once you have that, that equals 9 types. And that's been Enneagram wisdom for a while. And yet notice scientifically verified, at least if some of his, I don't know what you would call that, legitimated, or like if he has the evidence for it.
Yeah. So yes, you're right. And that's how he frames it. He doesn't say type 1, 2, 3, 4 to 9. But it's like AI,
Pathways.
agency inward, AO, agency outward, BD, bonding dyadically, which I think is awesome. One, I don't know if it's a critique or it's a curiosity that I would be interested in talking with him or just digging into more, is why those 2, because he prioritized agency, bonding, certainty, and inward outward dyadically. But then we also talk about emotional regulation in those 5 chapters and different emotional regulation strategies, which are upregulating, downregulating, and shifting. That's also a triad. And you can overlay that with agency, bonding, certainty. You could overlay that with what he calls a tendency of where your attention tends to go. You could overlay emotional regulation strategies with the tendency and still come up with 9 types. You could overlay all 3 of them and come up with even more. So I agree that yes, you get to the 9 types, but it's not really explained why that's the best overlay to come up with that as opposed to some other combination.
I could shoot from the hip. I think that this is correct though, in terms of, and it's when I've stumbled on that idea as well, at that point it's time to break out the red string at some levels, because the 9 types don't change when you add a 3rd category, and that becomes really interesting to me. And you could actually add a 4th, because he's not talking about stance, and that also doesn't change any of the things. So a tendency is that direction, inward, outward, or dyadic, both directions. The idea of, for those of you who are familiar with our language around Enneagram, emotional regulation strategy has to do with coping style and how we end up regulating when problems emerge.
That like the shifting is like the same thing as the positivity triad. So you just try to shift when you feel those bad emotions. And that's, to step back, the emotional regulation strategy, as he puts it, is how your brain modifies your negative experience, the emotions that you experience when they're negative. So do you upregulate those by putting them out into the world? If you're feeling angry, do you expel that anger? Do you feel that anger but keep it inside and channel it somewhere else? Or do you be like, I'm not angry, and then shift it and go somewhere else completely? So that is essentially analogous to positivity triad, for 9s, 2s, and 7s, where they shift, and then for 8s, 8s, 2s, and 7s, where they will be out, or will upregulate. I'm sorry, 8s.
Be eight,
Yeah, 8s.
it's 8, 4, and 6.
Thank you. 8s, 4s, and 6, when they will upregulate, and then the downregulation of just pushing it down inside and not emoting it for the rest. So anyway, continue. I just wanted to clarify when we said emotional regulation strategies, what it is the book's talking about.
Yeah. Big idea in terms of our language is like we do affect groups in terms of how we connect, but specifically how we are addressing our fear, shame, and anger has a direction to it. Mm-hmm. And then emotional regulation strategies, as was said, you start problem solving, and it creates it in our view, you shut down one of the centers. But he is coming to that same idea in a really fantastic way with doing the neuroscience. Lo and behold, the language is different, concept is identical.
Which personally, as we mentioned, I like the change in language. I think I've talked to you about this, but I'll
let's go there. Let's start with my critiques of
go
all the
ahead.
things.
Why are you mad about the language?
Tell me about the. We already got so my big problem, my primary problem. There is a simple, accessible vocabulary available. I felt like Siegel's choices of words are overly complicated. I felt like it moves us from language that's already there and functional to something else for no good reason. And it feels like there is an aversion to Enneagram past, which I share. There's a whole lot of bad marketing and foolish uses of terms in the past that it may be very, very wise to say, let's pause for a second and recategorize these things. The problem is he sounds, this will be an insult on one front, he sounds like a scientist. Mm-hmm. And some of the scientific language just isn't sticky. And when it's not sticky, it's not user-friendly. And I would strongly suggest that that's a negative.
And that's where, again, I just so wholeheartedly disagree. But I see where you're coming from. Because you're coming from it not as a scientist, not as a therapist, not as a clinician, and you don't like the language. Truth. Again, this book was not written for you, Jeff. This book was written for the therapists. And the therapists, with coming from scientific backing and being licensed, they have to follow scientific standards and principles. So what I will critique it is I don't even think that the language in the book was consistent and nailed down. He brings up things like a tendency and emotional regulation and systems of mind, and he kind of bounces back and forth, and I was trying to map and be like, wait, our system of mind, is that the same thing as that? And wait, affective states, aversive emotions. Okay, I think he's talking about the same thing there. So it was not necessarily consistent, and it did not define something. On the flip side of that, Enneagram doesn't either. Everybody likes to have their own, especially for like the other triads other than the centers of intelligence. People can't seem to agree on what those are called or what the names of each type are. So I think it's just human nature to want to put your own stamp on things. That said, I think my favorite part of this is not calling them types and calling them patterns, because especially in a therapeutic setting. Imagine that you go into a new therapist, you talk to them, you've never met them before, you're telling them about your life, and then they tell you within a half hour of speaking that, oh, well, yeah, it looks like you're an Enneagram type 3. First of all, whether or not you are an Enneagram type 3, you might be like, excuse me, like, you just met me. Do not tell me what I am and am not. That is so off-putting. If you are an Enneagram 3, maybe it would resonate. But if you're not, that's even worse because you're like, well, that's not me though. I don't resonate with that. And then you're having to struggle with, are they right? Do I take the authority or do I push back against them? Do I find a different therapist? Coming in, and if you were to have that same exact conversation with a therapist for 30 minutes, and then they said, I'm noticing patterns of prioritizing certainty and expressing that outward. That is a completely different conversation. That is somebody saying, I'm recognizing a pattern in what you're saying. Let's talk about that. It's not saying, certainty, outward, that's a 6. You are a 6. I think it just gives a little bit more grace as to the therapeutic approach for saying what is going on with you right now, especially with the Enneagram being so dynamic and you can move about and you can look different ways at different times in your life. If somebody comes to you and you're trying to help them then and there, not saying, what are you as a whole? What is your underlying core motivation for everything in the life? It's saying, right now, here's how I see you, and let's try to address that.
I have so much to say on what you just said, which I thought was all very well cast. And I think you're defending what I take to be his position really well. Let me start with non-scientific language because I think that really matters. I think he should write his book to scientists, and he should also know that there is a bibliography out there that he needs to be aware of. And it seems to me, if you don't do the research bibliographically, you're stepping into realms in a naive fashion or not a very, you need to do the bibliographic work. Now, you can change the lexicon, especially for your purposes, but footnote it. That seems to me just basic scholarship, but especially because he knows that he's writing a book that will be singular, that this will take the conversation much further than it's been in some of the terrible Enneagram texts that have come out in the last 20 years. He needs to know that he's special. And because he's special, he needs to do the work of footnoting the ideas. Otherwise, it creates confusion. For me, I'm very aware of how self-important Enneagram teachers are, including myself, and that we do reject other people's terminologies very early and just move off it and never say anything about it. Now, we didn't do that in our book. When I wrote my book, we were clear about ideas that had been done in the past, brought them into focus. If you came from this school of thought, here's what this concept is going to be in our work so we can move forward together. Again, that just seems basic scholarship to me and would have been so helpful. And
again, I don't think this book was for you. I don't think, like, if a therapist is already using the Enneagram in their practice, I don't think they need this book. They already know what they're doing. They know how to use it. So this is for people who are trying to figure out how to navigate personality and are not familiar with the Enneagram yet.
Is it not for me though?
It is because you're so curious and you're.
Why doesn't my presence matter, Danielle?
Well, it's not for me either. I'm not a therapist. I'm just a fan.
He's bringing concepts to a world that is much bigger than his specific, target audience. I mean, I'm confident he understands that. Certainly, Dr. David Daniels understands that.
Yeah.
Well, it feels to me lazy. And it feels like he's not. It feels like he's not doing a service to the rest of us.
And for me, on the flip side of the coin,
yeah,
I was glad because I've read enough Enneagram literature. I've read about the 9 types. I've read about gut, heart, mind triads. I don't need or want any of that. I would have skipped past all of that Enneagram fluff and said, I'm reading this because it's a science book. I need to know what you want to say about the science. So I am thankful.
Is he not scientifically validating a lot of the things that you've already intuitively embraced about Enneagram?
Yeah.
Enneagram obviously has done something for you. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. But he's tying in, he's saying, okay, we're going to talk about emotional regulation strategies. And I think he does he sprinkles in Enneagram stuff here and there. Like, if you are familiar with the Enneagram, you might recognize these as whatever. And then going about talking about them with that own framework and pulling in Panksepp's framework and pulling in polyvagal theory and that kind of stuff. That's what I'm interested in. I want to know that. I don't need to know his take on the Enneagram in this. I want to see how those things relate to personality in therapy, and understanding those patterns and breaking them down, and what are our human tendencies. And then being aware of the Enneagram, I can overlay that and say, oh, now I'm seeing that that is the same as, 3-6-9s have that connection attachment center. That's similar to the dyadic part of a tendency, which I want to get into the tendency, because there's not actually a clear mapping for that, I don't think.
Last on this, it's a 400-page book. 100 of it is grossly repetitious.
Yes.
An editor could easily have cut 100 pages, and they could have created space for the footnotes. And it seems to me that that's just a missed opportunity there. 100%. Or if he wants to sell a second book, obviously maybe they're just holding out for another big payday.
Do the PDP book and then say, okay, here's PDP translated Enneagram directly. I would love to help out with that. I would say, shoot, there was something that you said that I was like, oh, I have to mention that. Oh, it is one of my biggest pet peeve with this entire book, which is a pretty substantial pet peeve, is how poorly it was edited. Not in Correct. It's not like there's a bunch of spelling errors and grammatical nonsense, but
nope.
It did not need to be this long. It did not need Correct. To be this dense. It is extremely repetitive, which made me grumpy at first. And then I was like, okay, maybe, repetition helps you remember things better. So maybe it's good. But then it just kept going. And I'm like, okay, I get it. Move on. There was that. There was the fact that they don't use consistent language, so that you can't nail something down mentally and say that is that, and Correct. You keep hearing it called the same thing. The headers are like the structure of the chapters are not intuitive at all. There's one at the end of chapter 4, I think. He says that there's something that's a list of steps. It's page 75, a developmental perspective, 24 foundational steps in the PDP framework. And then it goes on to be 26. Yep. One of them is 10 words long, and multiple of them are over a page long. Those are not, and they stop being steps. They are not formatted consistently. They are not, there's no way to reference that and be like, okay, I'm very clearly seeing A, B, C, D. No, it's basically just musings, 26 musings shoved together called steps. And that's the biggest thing I took offense to, was that part. I'm not saying it's bad information, but a lot of the value of this book took multiple reads and a lot of deep thinking and plotting and assessment analysis, where I think that the points he was trying to make could have come across so much clearer and easier to understand and easier to digest if he'd had a better editor.
Agreed. It's also the case, like, some of the repetition was required because the foundational work of just defining your terms, really getting them solid and bold, and saying this is the idea at hand. Let's hold up this idea, package it, and unpack it. It's done very loose.
Yeah.
So this is why you need to subscribe to aroundthecircle.org and look at our deep dives, because we actually do the work of pulling all this apart, creating a vocabulary, and showing the overlaps. So bibliography has been done and put into footnotes. You just have to do it through our website now. That's actually the value that I bring, is all the things I'm critiquing, we ended up just doing for free. Not for free. It actually costs you a membership, but... The other thing, so I had two responses to your statement a while back. The second thing you brought up was that some of the Enneagram language is off-putting, and that what I heard was it does, like, sometimes using the language of type doesn't really sell, or it doesn't meet some people where they're at. Let me just grant that a lot of times the way that Enneagram gets communicated can be off-putting. I do think that that's valuable to say, and especially in a therapeutic sense, if you say it's easier to get somebody into the system by saying, I'm noticing a pattern, which I actually think is a really great phrase.
Mm-hmm.
I'm noticing a pattern. This comes from your early childhood development in theory. And let's talk about the pattern that you're exhibiting and why this would be just very natural. And that it has all sorts of positives and it has some foreseeable negatives. And a lot of the work of therapy that we're going to do with this material is just talking about both positives and negatives and getting some balance here.
Mm-hmm.
That strikes me as fantastic. And it also is just an indictment of some of the ways that Enneagram folks, especially myself, because I really like type, may approach it heavy-handedly. So I think you're right on that front.
Yeah. I will say
right.
that, again, one last thing about the language of it. Obviously, I've been talking my friends' and family's ear off for as long as I've known about the Enneagram, trying to talk about it with them, get their types. And some people latch on really fast, and other people still to this day, after talking with them for, I don't know, 6 years straight, still do not know, don't seem to identify with one. And so naturally, as I'm reading this book, I'm going back to those same friends and be like, guess what? I'm reading this book. Let me tell you all about it. It reframes the Enneagram into a science perspective. And then I tell them about the different the core motivating needs, the attendancies, the emotional regulation strategies, and multiple people that I have told that were previously skeptical have said, this is the first time I've understood the Enneagram. So the way that some people are more can handle the language of the Enneagram as it stands, and that's what works best for them, and that is completely fine. There's a lot of content out there for those people. This is one of the first things, again, not in the way it's written, but the content underlying it and the language it uses. There's another set of people who've just not been able to connect to Enneagram as it stands, and for some reason are able to connect with this and get that same value that the Enneagram provides. So that was the first. My sister was one of them, and we were a long time. We thought she was maybe a 3, but she just never really understood. We were back and forth, and then we kind of had landed on maybe she is a counterphobic 6. And then when I told her about the different agency, bonding, certainty, and, to be clear, we all need all of those. We all do prioritize those. It's like some of us, if you have a pie chart, that you can only have 100% in a pie chart. Some people have 50% allocated to one specific motivating need, and the other 2 split the other 50%. Some people are split pretty evenly, and those are the people that are really hard to nail down on a type. So when I told my sister about that, she was like, oh, I'm certainty 100%. That's definitely my focus. That's always been my focus. And it was like, oh, and then we talked about the dyadic, inward, outward, and then the upregulating, downregulating, shifting. And she was like, oh, I'm 1,000% a 6. I don't know why I've never seen that before, but it suddenly clicked with her. And now she wholeheartedly embraces that where she hadn't been able to before. So.
Yeah.
She's also in science, so maybe it's just a science people thing. Us weirdos.
Language is a tool, and it's used to communicate.
Yes.
And if you can't communicate with the terms, then the language isn't functioning as a tool. So the thing that you're saying, I think, is really important. And it may be, I don't know if this is a primary or a secondary effect. Like, I don't know if it's by design that he's saying, look, we've tried your terms. They don't work in our community. And that's why we're deconstructing them and reconstructing them in a different form. If one says, look, language wise, this actually connects with people's intuitions, and they're able to grasp the ideas better given this framing versus past framing. That just is what it is. I just have an intuition about what's sticky. This feels very, very complex. But if you say, nope, it actually works better than the simplified terms, then
not for everyone. And again, not for everyone.
There you go.
But That's what, just like
And
the Enneagram, we are nuanced and complex, and we need and want different things. And that's okay. And it's beautiful. And none of us are wrong for what our natural inclinations are.
yeah. All right, let's talk about a tendency. What are your
Okay.
thoughts here?
So, for when going into this, I was mentally mapping everything onto the Enneagram and kind of being like, okay, so this is equivalent to that, and that's equivalent to that. Got it. And I did that for a
Mm-hmm.
tendency for a while. And then it was all of a sudden clicked. I'm like, wait a second. It's not, because it's not just the connection centers. It's not attachment, frustration, and rejection, because you have, that is,
Oh, yes.
yeah, it connection, the
Yep.
attachment triad, sure. But then you're relating, the inward types are ones, fours, and fives. And the
Mm-hmm.
outward types are eights, twos, and sevens. And
Mm-hmm.
those are not groupings that I've seen before put together.
Correct. I have a very quick answer to this.
Okay.
He gets it wrong.
Mm.
He shifts the 5 and the 7, and he does so because
Well, I'm not talking about shifting. I'm not talking about shifting.
Not shifting in terms of the language of emotional regulation. The group thinks that 5s are inward because they're withdrawing, and that 7s are outward because they're independent. The solution to this, and why he gets 5s and 7s wrong, is that 5s are reacting to their fear and withdrawing, but the fear is outside of themselves. 7s look as though they're moving outward, but they're actually addressing their fear inwardly, and it's producing outward action. But 1s, 4s, and 7s address their underlying feeling inwardly. It causes outward movement for the 7, but they're addressing that inward fear, and the inwardness is what matters. So the tendency for the 7 actually is inward. The behavior is outward, but that's not what is being assessed. So I think he gets it wrong.
So how would you define a tendency?
A tendency is the direction of the energy in your neural pathway, your dominant neural pathway. A tendency is the direction of the energy of your dominant neural pathway. And it's addressing the primary underlying feeling. And that's why it's very clean with the affect groups, and it's not clean in his material. And by the way, when you shift 5s and 7s, a really interesting thing happens, because it also blows open, and you can add stress and security moves to everything in a really interesting way, given his framework. But you can't if you keep the 7 and 5 going, 7 outward and 5 inward.
Yeah. So I took the tendency as being what and where your brain naturally monitors in response to when you have a negative emotional reaction. So if a 9 or if an 8 is feeling angry, are they looking internally for solutions, externally for solutions, or kind of both at the same time? And I think that's where having 5 be inward made sense to me, because they're looking toward inward of, what can I do to deal with this? What can I do internally? What's going on with me that I can create more certainty out in the world? Whereas a 7 is more looking around at them and be like, what's out there? What can I be certain about and pivot myself to target towards? So that's how I made sense of the 5 in, 7 out.
I think you're saying exactly what he thinks. And I'm saying this is exactly why it's wrong. It's wrong because it's actually not about the solutions. It's about the problem.
But I think that's where
tendency
the definition of a tendency really matters there. And again, a complaint about the book is that it's not definitive. It's not like there's a glossary that says this is a tendency. This is exactly what I mean when I say a tendency.
Yeah. What I took, and I know that we did in our discussions, we ended up going down those paths. It's the direction of the pathway. So really the question is, what are the vectors? His name for the centers, the intelligence centers, is vectors. And is your tendency aiming at the target, at bonding, agency, and certainty? Or is your tendency aiming at relief of fear, shame, and anger? In my view, it doesn't work systemically. It doesn't work if you're aiming at getting your target, agency, bonding, and certainty. It does work if a tendency is about meeting the underlying feeling of fear, shame, and anger. And so that's why I think a tendency ought to be, I think everything in the framework of his theory is really, really great, interesting, and I think he just misses it here. And the reason you should say he misses it here is twofold. One, it complicates things. It shifts that 5-7, but if you put 5 and 7 back in the right, here's actually the argument. If you put 5s and 7s in the way I'm describing, 5s are dealing with outward fear, 7s are dealing with inward fear. Every stress and security move in every single type is a single shift. It's a shift either in your tendency or it's a shift in your vector, your center. So name any number and they shift just one thing, either the direction or the center of intelligence. And I think that's fascinating because it neurologically, it would mean when we actually do experience stress, this is what's taking place, and what the Enneagram is seeking to describe is that our nervous system naturally pivots either directionally, tendency-wise, or it shifts our vector. And most of us shift our vector when we move into stress and security. And then it also happens with security. It's just a single move, and that again, the elegance, I think, is a I don't know if this works scientifically, but I assume elegance can be a theory promoting element of a theory.
Yeah.
So this is more elegant than this. It's overly complicated. There's like there's an Occam's razor kind of element to it here.
Nice. Well, yeah, as I said, I haven't read the specific pattern chapters yet, so I'll be interested to go and kind of maybe even first dive into 5s and 7s and see what he's trying to get at there, and is there something, because I'll have to think about that. I did the 3-6-9 felt accurate. I see those as being having a kind of almost an internal battle with yourself of, well, okay, I take this back. 9s and 3s, yes. 9s will see what's going on out there. They know what they're feeling inside. There's that conflict. There's that tension that exists. So it gets really overwhelming. And a lot of times they'll just be like, I'm just going to, forget that anger and agency, just kind of shut down. 3s see, they know what they want. They see what's going on. But then it's like a bonding thing. And there's that conflict of who am I and who do I want to be with myself? Who do I want to be to and for everybody else? They're not always in concert, so they don't necessarily feel bonding centric. I don't know that I see that same thing with a 6. Like, I can see that they, might see what's going on outside and understand internally, but I don't feel like that translates into a suppression of certainty, a need for certainty. Like a 9 will suppress their need for agency. A 3 will suppress their need for bonding. But a 6, I don't necessarily see suppressing a need for certainty. I feel like that's something that they are the biggest advocate for. And it's almost the 7 that tends to suppress that need for certainty out of those 3. But I've never seen a 9-3-7 grouping.
If I'm hearing you right, your argument here would be more evidence for what I was saying about 5s and 7s. If you make the target of dyadic focus, agency, bonding, and certainty, it doesn't work for perhaps the reasons that you're saying. if you make the dyadic movement about addressing your underlying feeling, then it does work, because 6s are fearful of what's internal, anxious about what's within and what's without. The 3 ends up seeking to relieve their shame internally and externally, and that leads to a lot of the behaviors we see in 3s. And so too the 9s. It's not about the agency internally and externally. That would be the solution. It's about addressing the anger within and anger without, and that produces the behavior. That seems clean to me, and would be another reason for thinking it's much more about the underlying feeling. I forgot the name that he uses for those emotions.
For which ones?
But for anger, shame, and fear, and he uses relational disconnection.
Yeah, so that was the Panksepp's framework of emotional systems or emotion systems. That's what he pulled from for that, and it's been around since the 90s, I guess, and it's also referred to as effective neuroscience. But there's 7 core emotions that we have, that we've biologically had for, centuries, millennia. And the 3 aversive are fear, rage, and panic, which also, rage can also be anger, and panic can also be sadness or separation distress.
Yeah, there it is.
So aversive, I think he calls them aversive emotions.
I mean, to pitch it as a question to you, doesn't it make more sense that your nervous system, the energy of your nervous system, is going to confront something that's a negative stimuli, as opposed to trying to take hold of a positive? I feel like pre-wiring, I suppose I'd have the strong intuition that we're much more likely to have our nervous system shaped early on by negative stimulus.
I think so. Again, under Panksepp's framework, this goes into a neurobiological aspect where you have 7 core regions in your brain meant for, there's the 3 aversive, fear, rage, and panic, and then you have 4 appetitive is what they're called, or like the pleasant ones, which are seeking, lust, play, and care. So 4 of those are known to, like, they're kind of like the original 4 that then we have grown and adapted into social creatures and gained the other 3. But the original 4 were 2 and 2. So there was fear, which kept you alive, kept you away from danger. Rage helped you protect your own resources, your own tribe, your own offspring. Seeking help, but that seeking is one of the positives. Seeking gets you out into the world, helps you find resources, and then lust helps you procreate. So the additions on top of that, as we became social creatures, were the panic or sadness, separation anxiety type stuff, and then the play and the care. So at its core, I think that we're wired for all of those regions in our brain are there. And how I interpret it is that we might be biologically prone to have one more activated than the other, but every instance of our existence is making some of those areas fire more and build more neural pathways and be more reactive, and pruning other areas that aren't used as much, that just start withering away and are harder to access. But whether we are pessimistic creatures or optimistic creatures and focus on the good or the bad, I don't know. I don't know that it would be a rule that we would always focus on the negative. I don't know. I have no evidence for that either way, but my gut, which does not actually have a brain inside of it, seems to think that it would be more personal and situational, and that, we're going to focus on the bad to keep ourselves safe, but we also have to focus on the good to keep ourselves alive as well.
There's a chicken and the egg problem here as you're talking. That is it the case that we naturally desire something called agency, and when it's absent we experience anger? Or is it the case that anger flares up in response to our circumstances and we develop this idea of agency that is repelling said anger? I don't know how that would work, but I think that would be important. And that would be just, that strikes me, and this is what we did in our book. That is primary. Your center is where everything starts, because you're taking in the world through one of those centers, through one of those vectors in Siegel's language. and giving it primacy. That's the pathway. That's the primary pathway through which you're interpreting the world up front. And it's causing so much of your behavior because that emotion ends up being dominant.
Yeah.
I'll pitch a question to you, though, on this front, because you highlighted it. I thought it was fascinating if you go down this road. If you do the combinations that he does, it's centers and direction. That creates 9 types, right? As you were saying, agency inward, agency outward, agency dyadically. That's 8s, 9s, and 1s. They're seeking agency either internally, 1s, agency externally, 8s, or in both directions, 9s. That would be just one of the centers. Now, what's interesting is that when you bring in how each of the types deals with problems, what he calls emotional regulation strategies, the vectors all split into 3 again.
Correct.
In a very strange way. So let's just take your triad. The 9s are seeking agency dyadically, but they and they alone are the positive outlook triad in my language. They and they alone shift in order to deal with emotional regulation. Now 3s don't do that. 3s likewise, dyadic energy, different vector. They're interested in bonding and relieving their relational distress. But when they solve a problem, they do so by downregulating their emotion. And we can see this with 3s. That seems spot on. 6s upregulate, but 6s also dyadic energy, different center, different vector. Their vector is based on certainty. I find this fascinating because it works across the types. I have a theory for how this would work, but I would be thrilled to hear, like, what do you do with that? I don't know what you do with that.
I've done a couple beta tests and had, friends and family take it, and it's catching on a lot, but it's kind of why I've noticed 7, especially within this framework, there's something off because 7 tends to respond very strongly to agency.
Okay.
So certainty is, they're in the certainty triad, but when you talk about agency and being able to want to do your own thing, that's very, very 7. So how do you pull that out without redefining it? And then 9s hardly ever show up in anger or in agency. They seem to be more focused or responding heavily to bonding. So trying to peel all that apart and say, how can you create some sort of questionnaire or test or something that therapists could use as a guide to talk to their clients? You can't just definitively say, I'm going to get your agency score, and then if you score high, that means you are definitely a 1, an 8, or a 9, because that's not necessarily going to be the case. But getting those pictures and understanding, okay, well, how does the emotional regulation strategy play into that, and how does the tendency play into that? How does your current stress state play into that? I think those, I'm working on it. So all that to say, how do you break down the emotional regulation strategies and what's there with those patterns and that overlaps? I'm trying to figure it out. So if you figure it out before me, please let me know so that I can put it into my scoring algorithm.
Well, let me pitch you an idea. I do have thoughts on this.
Great.
I love the idea of vectors. I think that this book highlights something essential for me as an Enneagram theorist, and that is the idea of wholeness, and that is that we're not just a body type. Body types emphasize agency, but they still have an emotional core, and they still have, obviously, a desire for certainty. It's just one of those pathways is elevated. I think we get stuck, and this may be a problem with the language, in thinking, you're just kind of stuck in the body, the heart, or the head. I think that's a mistake. I think all of us need to come to this thinking of ourselves holistically. I have a relationship with my body, I have a relationship with my mind, and I have a relationship with my heart. Now, when life unfolds, something happens. Emotional regulation strategies are about problem solving, in my view. So you're either down regulating your emotions, up regulating your emotions, or shifting. Notice, so in my language for coping style, what 2 7s and 9s are actually doing is they're shutting down action. What 2 7s and 9s when problem solving don't care about solving the problem in that moment. They do care about how they feel and how other people feel, and they are pushing for optimism. That's the problem solving strategy. 9s, it's going to be okay. 2s, I'm here to help. We're in this together. 7s, hey, this is terrible. Let's go do something else, don't you think? None of that's active. All of that is positive thinking. As was said with him, it's a shift. It's shifting away from the problem. For myself, for 1s, 3s, and 5s, we shut down our emotional center. So if you thought about it with brain chemistry in mind, the vector of your bonding relational energy gets shut down for a minute by the 1s, 3s, and 5s. My emotions don't matter about this. Your emotions don't matter about this, because those don't solve problems. We're going to get active about what we think. And it's almost like you push into just the head and just the body at some levels. And that makes a lot of sense to me, like neurologically, that you would, like, it's almost like there's a problem solving, it's the velociraptors testing the places in the fence, what's got electricity. Let's pull away from this and try that. And so too for 4s, 6s, and 8s, they're going to shut down thinking. Upregulating your emotion means that you're not thinking anymore at some levels. You're acting on your emotions. So in all of these ways, this is what's kind of core for me. You have a relationship with each of those centers. Naming how you have a relationship with the center is really important when you're in stress, when you're in security, when you're balanced, and how that flows. As a 1, I'm thinking repressed. 1s, 2s, and 6s, we have a repressed center or a center that comes last. And so here would be the big thought for me in terms of this book is that you can only emphasize 2 vectors at once. You can't do all 3 at once. Wholeness in therapy, that's a great target in that we need to have balance, but practically speaking, you can only embrace 2 at once. As a 9, you move off of your body and you emphasize thinking and feeling, and that becomes where you do most of your business until you intentionally go into that body space and do productive action. But for the most part, you're comfortable there in thinking and feeling. For me, I'm most comfortable in acting and feeling. Thinking comes last. That seems to explain a ton for me. It was a very long answer, and I apologize.
No. That was interesting to frame it as the emotional regulation strategies shift those types to a certain motivational need or center of intelligence.
It's on the flip side, it's repressing a center of intelligence, and what happens is a problem solving strategy.
But I could almost see it like, the 2 7s, 9s, when they, by doing their shifting, they're prioritizing bonds first and foremost. And then by down regulating 1s, 3s, and 5s, are prioritizing certainty. What do we know? What can we do? What is absolute? And then when you upregulate, you are prioritizing your agency. You are saying, I can do, I can express, I can put out into the world. I hadn't really mapped that out. So that's interesting to me.
I would really want, and you can hear it in your language. It's not just 1 center, it's 2 centers. So the 1 is thoughtfully saying what's the right thing to do. And those are 2 centers. The 3 is saying, what is the goal? I'm thoughtfully seeking a target and executing. The 5 is saying, what is the data? How am I going to solve this through the data? Here's what we should think and execute. That what doesn't matter to the 1, 3, and 5 is how they feel about the problem. For the 4, 6, 8, they are emotional about it. They're upregulating emotion, but they're acting on that upregulated emotion. They want you to feel the same. So our language for 4, 6s, and 8s is that they are the emotional response triad. That is, they are seeking to get an emotional response from the people in front of them, because it's not about solving the problem. 4, 6s, and 8s want to know if you see them and if you see their interior life. If you're on the team, Team 8 requires you to see them. Team 6 requires you to see them. You know, if you're on Team 6, if you can see the same threats that I see, if you get emotional about the same threats that I get emotional about, then you're trustworthy. And that's how this problem is solved. It's not about solving the problem. It's about getting people to see it's about producing in them an emotional response so that the 4, 6, and 8 know where they stand in relationship to these other people. And then for 2, 7s, and 9s, it is about shifting emotions, but all of it is think a certain thing about the world. I want you to have an emotional reaction given the fact that this is the positive thing we could envision in the world, as it were. This problem for the 9 doesn't matter as much as you think it does, and therefore you should feel a certain way about the world. This problem isn't as big as you think it is, says the 2. We are in this together. This problem isn't as big as we think it is, says the 7. We have other options. All of it is about your thinking and feeling, and that's how the problem solving works. That really seems clean to me. Every time I say it, I'm like, this works. This should be in print somewhere.
If you knew an author that could put it into print.
If only somebody wasn't lazy and trying to create have misguided priorities. Anyway, that's how I would address that. But so let's shift back to Siegel's stuff. It seems to me that now he invites this, he says there's a whole host of Enneagram topics that he hasn't done business with. But if I was going to plus Siegel's work, I would say you need to do more work with how the vectors interact with one another. And you have put your thumb on one of them. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
Yep. Yeah, I definitely, my struggle with types is that I just know so many people who are on the cusp of multiple. And again, it gets down to your core motivation, and we can eventually get there. But unless you really know yourself well and you've kind of peeled back a lot of the bullshit layers and talking about like typing someone before they've done that seems borderline irresponsible, or having somebody type themselves.
Agreed.
Because then they're responding to, they're talking about what they perceive themselves to be or what they wish they were or whatnot. So by doing the patterns instead and saying, seeing a pattern and high bonding pattern or high outward pattern or whatever, to me is more helpful at the end of the day to helping somebody maybe eventually find their Enneagram type once they've addressed that pattern and figured out, is that actually my pattern? Is that something that I've been doing since I was a kid? Yeah, it is. Okay, good. Or is it, oh, that's my pattern because I am stressed and because I am trying to avoid something or whatnot. Yeah, I don't know. I'll get on off my pattern soapbox.
No, let me pitch a metaphor. I knew the world changed when my first child was born. I knew it changed because somebody brought a device into the recovery room that took a digital picture. And background, I grew up in the 90s in which we had disposable cameras, and you would shoot for a week or two with your friends and take them to the photo place and get your photos back in like 2 months, and you got 2 copies maybe. And I have family in Spain. If I actually wanted to get one of those pictures to them, I would have taken the picture sometime in December. I would have got the pictures sometime in March. I would have had 2 copies. I would have sent one via mail to my family in Spain, and it probably would have arrived in June. It's like half a year. The world changed when my child was born in my mind because somebody took a picture of my child, and my family in Spain had it that afternoon, and it blew my mind. I was an evangelist for digital photography from that day forward. Have you tried this thing? Now, I did not realize how powerful the internet was. This is how the Enneagram is in my mind. I found out my type. It exposed some stuff. I became an evangelist. I was telling everybody about these things. We don't understand how well this language actually taps into the human psyche and can do great good and incredible damage, and is thoroughly complicated at levels. I mean, there are levels here that are we have not reached yet. I'm very aware that we're still digging and uncovering, an enormous city, and we haven't even arrived at all that's there to be discovered. That's what I hear when you're saying. So yes, of course, you have a friend who gets you like I'm really into the Enneagram. You just need to find your type. What you're inviting them into is an incredibly powerful tool that can do a lot of damage. Mm-hmm. And so you got to be careful.
Yep.
That's how anyway, what do you think about that?
No, yeah, I fully agree. And there's some people in my life that I explicitly choose not to talk about the Enneagram with, or if they'll bring it up and say, oh, you need to figure out my Enneagram type. You need to give me a test. And I immediately go, oh, well, first of all, no tests, but yeah, we can talk sometime, and I will be happy to talk about them. But there will also be some people I will push on and be like, we need to talk through this and figure out where you land. And there's other people that I'm like, I don't think you are ready yet. I don't think that I've already known people who have self-identified and self-misidentified on multiple occasions, and it's like there's other stuff there. There's filters that you have in front of your face that are blinding you to getting down to the actual root. And so talking about it will just, it's not a BuzzFeed article. It's not a BuzzFeed quiz for you to just click some buttons and then self-identify.
Agreed.
I will share, as I think if we are wrapping up, one of the things that came from this, that from reading this book, that wasn't even really about PDP necessarily, was an analogy that I've started using again when explaining this to people, and it's been well received. So I wanted to share my little analogy.
Yeah.
But I've started seeing pretty much anything that we go through in life is like going up a ski lift to the top of a mountain. And it's taking you up there. And when you get to the top, you know where you want to be when you get down to the base of the mountain. You parked somewhere. You got to get back to your car. But you're at the top of the mountain. It's very easy to go literally any direction. And when you end up at the end is going to be dramatically different depending on which direction you take. And the very first time you ever go up that ski lift, some rabbit had traipsed through some of the fresh powder. And so you're like, okay, well, I'll just follow that. And then the next time you go up, okay, well, I went down that way. The snow's already packed down a little bit from my skis. I'll just do that again. And you keep doing it, and you keep doing it, and you keep doing it. And a lot of times we don't have the capacity to be making complex, nuanced decisions for every single thing that we do every minute of every day. We would break down. We take the path of least resistance as much as we can. The trick is figuring out when it doesn't make sense to be taking that same path over and over. So if you go up to the top of some situation, takes you up to the top of the hill, and maybe it's you're in a relationship that you shouldn't be in, and you're really used to just going along with the flow. And we had a discussion, and I had the thought that I don't want to be with them, but I'm just going to be quiet, and it's fine. It's probably just me. I'm just going to keep taking that path. At some point, you're going to get up there and realize that your car is literally on the other side of the mountain. So you can take that same path, and it's going to be a very painful walk to get around to get back to your car at the end of the day. Or you can look at the fresh powder. It's scary. You don't know. There's not a clear path that you can take. You haven't done it before. The powder might make you trip and fall on your face because it's too loose. You don't know. But if you do it once, the next time you go up on that ski lift, there's going to be ski trails there. And it's still going to be a little rough, and it's still going to be a little rocky because it's just two lines or one snowboard line, whatever you do. But the more and more you go down that path, the easier it's going to be to get to the bottom and be able, the other path is still going to be there. Some snow might come, but it's not going to be fully filled. You can always take that other path. I see that as kind of using the Enneagram or the PDP is figuring out, identifying what that path that you take naturally is, understanding when it's very helpful and when it's right to use, but understanding when it is taking you to somewhere that you actually don't want to be for your goals in life, for your
Mm-hmm.
relationships, for your relationship with yourself, and learning that they're acknowledging, first of all, just looking around and seeing, oh, there are other ways to go down this mountain, and then building up that bravery in order to take one of those ways.
I love this.
So,
Yeah, that, one of the most helpful things, if you are a physicalist, if you think that you are only your physical body, that you don't have like a immaterial mind or an immaterial soul, some of the things that's interesting on this book ends up being on these fronts, that building up those other pathways creates something that you can't have otherwise, and that is freedom and volition.
mm-hmm.
Otherwise, you will live in the pathways that are, you know, you developed early on in your life, and those will remain, and you are determined at some severe levels by your brain chemistry. You know, there's one of my favorite memes is it's a picture of the human nervous system, but it looks just disgusting. It's like all these, you know, it's all the nerve endings, and it looks like an alien creature, but at the bottom it says something to the effect of, this creature lives inside of you and controls everything you do. What Daniels wants to say at some point, I meant to ask you about this. He wants to say that you have three brains at some level, that your nervous system actually has three primary spheres, that there's the gut, the heart, and the
that goes to polyvagal theory.
Oh, is that what that is? So you've said that a handful of times. I don't know what that is.
Yeah, well, happy to share a little bit. I'm definitely by far and away not an expert on polyvagal theory, but I know a little bit. So it's been around since like the early 90s. It's mostly well received, and there's a lot of scientific backing for a lot of it. Obviously, there's always skeptics, and there's always people who are like, it's just a theory, but it goes to your vagus nerve, which starts in your brainstem and goes all the way down into like your stomach area. And it is responsible for like everything that, or a lot of the things that go along. Okay, I'm going to start again. It's responsible for pretty much everything that goes on within your parasympathetic nervous system. So, and it has different branches, it has different functions. It does modulates things like stress response and your respiratory patterns, your heart rate, even the vocal tone of your voice, because it innervates your laryngeal muscles and like your vocal cords. Anyway, it does a lot, it modulates a lot, and it can also detect and transmit different things throughout your body. So it has some aspects of it, some nerve endings are receivers and some are like put information out. So it can take information of what's going on in a specific area, and it can also take signals and tell an area to do things, sending brain signals down. So in the gut area, like the branch that goes down there, the dorsal branch, it goes below your diaphragm. It helps with a lot of things like gut and digestion, for example. So in the book, he talks about how, you know, we don't have an actual brain in our gut. We have nerves and we have the dorsal branch of our vagus nerve, but our brain is up here. It is only up here. However, there is this universal human experience of feeling like that gut instinct that you feel it in your belly when you're like, but I just know this is right. And for some reason, people will always just hold their gut and say, I feel it's in my gut. So his theory is that that's actually the vagus nerve, that dorsal branch of the vagus nerve that's under your diaphragm in your gut area, that could be activated in states of helplessness. So goes to that agency, the anger. The opposite of agency is being helpless. The opposite of being able to do things for yourself and having your own autonomy to do so is being at the whims of others and being helpless to do anything. So that was really interesting to me to and it's a theory, but it would be really interesting to explore in more detail. And then the ventral branch goes right around, it goes above your diaphragm and ends in your chest area. And that's what orchestrates your social behaviors and your engagements with others. So kind of that heart feeling. So when you feel something like your heart is broken, it could literally be because your brain is sending signals down to the part that then above your diaphragm, the part of the vagus nerve above your diaphragm that is trying to coordinate all this social dynamics that you're trying to manage and juggle. And so you feel it in your heart.
I love that as kind of a proof, the idea that we feel it in our heart. In theory, the heart muscle is not responsible for bonding with another human being.
Right.
It's responsible for
Pumping
circulating blood through. It has nothing to do with whether or not you connect with another person, but we so associate the feeling of connecting with another person with those feelings that take place in that sphere of our body. That would just be kind of a proof for like something is going on inside of us physiologically that has to do with those, I mean, with those nerve endings, or something in that sphere of the body is creating, is interpreting connection, is, you know, what would it be? You would have to be experiencing something there that's causing all of those butterflies, feelings of connection, heartbrokenness. Your body's doing business with it in that location, correct?
Yeah. Yeah. So like your nerve endings are there. They are sending and receiving signals. And those sent signals make you feel things in that region because they are activating different functions. They're activating different processes that then stir up other things that are physically in that region. So you would physically feel it there.
So as you said, you don't have three brains.
Correct.
You do have three what would it be, like three primary branches of your nervous system?
I'm not studied in anatomy, but I won't say that there are only three, but I will say I know there's the dorsal branch and the ventral branch, and the dorsal branch is below goes down below your diaphragm. The ventral branch is above your diaphragm, and everything connects at your brainstem. So yeah, polyvagal theory has the his last name's Porges, Porges. I probably am saying that wrong.
Bringing it full circle, then you're getting inputs from these branches of your nervous system. Early on in your development, some of the pathways associated with one of the branches become more dominant and create the patterns. Wouldn't that be how that would work then? You're getting input, and something in your brain gives preference to one of the branches. The one in your gut, the one in your heart, the one in your head.
It could be that the feelings there are just manifestations of those 7 emotion centers in your brain.
And they create, but the big idea being that's one of the pathways becomes, in his language, was like wider and deeper. Mm-hmm. If it gets attention, it gets more traction, or I forgot he uses a handy phrase.
Yeah, it's like where I wrote it down somewhere and I'm trying to find it. Yeah, it's like where attention goes, neural connection grows, and something else
there it is.
Goes.
And your energy flows. Let me say, just from memory, it's something to the extent of where your attention goes, the neural pathways grow, and your future energy flows. But that's bringing it full circle in terms of what does this book have to do with the Enneagram? Enneagram is just a language. Enneagram is just one way of describing something that seems to be going on inside of ourselves and giving language for where our motive originates and why our behavior seems to follow certain patterns. Mm-hmm. If you get into say it's the case that you had a map that was about human density in America, and then you had a map that was about elevation across America. And then you had a map that was about temperatures, average temperature in America. All of these would be describing America. They're just doing so from 3 different perspectives. Enneagram's a map. That's all it is. And it's just a map of the human personality, as we say. And it's seeking to bring language and understanding with some symbols, and here's the key, and here's the language that we use, and trying to describe something. Siegel seems to be using, in part, a very, very similar map that has the benefit of coming at, its topic, which is us, with a slightly different language, but elevating early childhood development of our nervous system and how that would then manifest some of the behaviors and motives that we have as we proceed. And lo and behold, those 2 maps can go over very cleanly. Maybe that would be a more gracious way of coming to the material, that he's just drawing up a different map. It's for therapists.
Yeah. Well, as he laid it out early in the book, there were 3 key ideas he was trying to get at with this framework. One was creating a clinically useful, neurobiologically informed framework of personality. And then a second was creating a lifespan model of personality that specifically links infant-child temperament to adult personality, which I haven't studied this enough on my own, but he says there's a pretty wide gap there. There's a lot of study about what goes on around prenatal, postnatal, infancy, etc. And then we look at adult personality, but understanding that bridge of how do you get from point A with your ingrained temperament to then the whole person you are when you're an adult being. What causes that? What are the inputs that then factor into that version of you? And so he's trying to lay that framework out to help bridge that gap that he sees. And then the third one that he listed was the key idea was that seeking wholeness, as he calls it, which is a little woohoo for me, but seeking wholeness is the main driver for personality development in life. And it's that everybody is seeking to feel complete, feel whole, find a peace within themselves to exist within. And
he used the phrase homeostasis at one point, as though like getting rid of those underlying feelings is a target, but needs to be done by elevating the other pathways so that you can navigate the world in such a way that, because that's what we actually want, is to alleviate those feelings. That's what I took from his I think you're right. We spent a lot of time on the woo-woo-ness and like what he's being prescriptive. Wholeness is not a scientific category. Like at one level, it's a prescriptive category. It's a value judgment about what human beings ought to be targeting. Why not live in excess? And so, but if you grant that, if you grant the target, then a lot of fun stuff happens. Yeah. Boom. All of that can be found at aroundthecircle.org. Just click on collections and reading room. You'll see, again, like we got like 20 more hours of this. If you really got into this material, you must go. So that's what I can plug is you should go to aroundthecircle.org, jump in as a member, do the deep dive, man. You got this far in this podcast. You apparently love Enneagram and science. That's one place to go. Another fantastic place to go is Danielle's work. Danielle, tell me about your work.
Well, I can be found on Instagram at Scientific Enneagram. That is my landing zone whenever inspiration strikes on trying to bridge the gap between Enneagram and science. I create something that's pretty to me, at least, and drop it on there, trying to break things down a little bit. I also have a podcast channel that I started at a very inconvenient time, and I'm working to get back into. So I think this episode will wind up on that channel as well, and then hopefully more to come. I'd love to talk even more about the PDP in episodes on there and break it down a little bit. And then the third thing I will plug is that I am still trying to work on that not a test or the Enneagram tool to helping understand pattern or doing pattern recognition. And I need beta testers. So I'm an iterative person, and I like to make changes and then send it out and have people take it, and then look at the data, see what it says, see what's working, see what's not, make some changes, send it out again. Not everybody is interested, especially everybody I know is taking a new version of a test every week or two. So I could, if that sounds exciting to people, or they're willing to contribute to the scientific tool, if you would email me at hello@scientificenneagram.com, I would love to have more beta testers, and we'll add you to the distro whenever there's a new beta test to try out.
Danielle is doing truly singular work in my estimation, and I'm really excited. What really happened is you gave a fantastic trailer for this upcoming podcast. It's kind of like a movie trailer. It's like 6 months prior to release. Just going to whet your appetite for all the glory that's coming. So I'm very excited for your work to come, and thrilled that we got to have this conversation. So
thanks.
That's what I got. You got anything else?
Nope. Nothing from me.
She's Danielle Fuller, Scientific Enneagram. Appreciate
He's
you.
Jeff.
And I'm just Jeff.
Just Jeff. Singular. Singularity.
Somebody sent me on Amazon.com. Somebody had uploaded a file for a book called Infinite Jeffs instead of Infinite Jess. The entire book is just
Jeff over and over.
It's the dumbest thing ever. But yeah, in essence,
nice.
Just put Jeff on anyway.
Nice.
So I'm Jeff.